Hi, this is Eric for Otoy. In this video, we're going to talk about using the Octane mapping textures. And you can see here they are. They're in the mapping section in Hypershade under Octane textures in the Octane section. So right here. And for this video, I'm using machinery 01.ma. There's only 3 mapping textures: baking, triplanar, and UVW. So the baking texture I actually discuss and demonstrate in the video on displacement maps, but basically allows you to take like an Octane procedural texture and use it as a displacement map because it bakes the texture into an image in the background for you. Normally, displacement maps in Octane can only take image map inputs, but this is kind of a nice workaround here. So that bakes any procedural texture into an image map. The triplanar texture can be used to apply multiple textures to the same surface through a single node. So let's create a sphere. So I'm going to create a polygon, sphere, and let's move it over here. I'm going to throw a glossy material on here. So if it's not rendering, I'm going to go find that whole script that I have that resets the pre-cache. Run that real quick. And now we have this. So just again, if you're curious how I did that, I demonstrated the script in another video, but what I'm doing really is I've just written a script that automatically sets this frames to pre-cache to 1 and then back to 0 again, so that it forces Octane for Maya to refresh if it's not refreshing correctly. So we have our sphere here, and go in the attribute editor. I'm going to click on the checkerboard next to diffuse, and under Octane textures, go to mapping, and I'll choose the Octane triplanar texture. And you can see our sphere becomes green, blue, and red. And in the attribute editor, we can see here the inputs for the texture. So this allows you to use multiple textures in the same surface, mapped from 3 different directions. 3 in the positive X, Y, and Z, and 3 in the negative X, Y, and Z. So it's a total of 6 textures, really. But if you take a look here in the attribute editor, you can see it's color-coded, so I can see which texture is going to what part of the model. So if I click, for instance, on this checkerboard next to the positive X-axis texture, and let's throw a marble texture on there, you can see there's our marble texture. And then let's go back up a node. And let's go down here to the blue textures here, and I will add a noise texture. So you can see there's the noise. And then let's go to this other red texture here. Let's add checks. Go up 1 to this blue texture. Do rigid fractal. So you can see I've got 4 different textures here, and of course I can add a couple more for the green inputs, but I think you get the idea. Then you have a blend angle, which allows you to blend between each texture. So this is a great way to sort of combine textures, but do it in a very interesting way. So it's not just one texture all over the entire surface. And then you can set the coordinate space to object space or world space. And then you have an overall transform. So let's say I put a, let's do a full transform here and rotate it 20 degrees. Let's do 60. So you can see it's rotating the textures. Probably easier to see if I remove the blend angle. So there you go. So you can see it's rotating the whole thing. So that is the triplanar texture. It's not exactly the same as the triplanar projection, which you find down here. So it's basically a triplanar texture, and this is triplanar projection, and we'll talk about triplanar projection in the movie on projections. Now let's take a look at UVW transform. So I'm going to select the sphere here and get rid of it. And let's select this surface right here. So the UVW texture, what it allows you to do is take one texture and map it twice to the same surface with different transforms. So it kind of allows you to layer the same texture. And this is useful because since Octane is a GPU-based renderer, texture memory is at a premium. So any place you can save a little memory by repeating it or reusing the same texture is always a good idea. So let's take a look at how this works. I'm going to graph the material on the selected object, and it's our metal texture. Let's see what this is applied to. So it's applied to a bunch of different surfaces here, but let's use it anyways because it'll be fun. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to layer a bump texture onto this surface using UVW transform. So let's just go to the metal attributes and find the bump channel, and I'm going to choose float image texture. And then for the image, I'm going to open up the source images and find the panel 06 bump. When I load that, you can see we have this kind of nice detail looking bump on the surfaces. So let's say we wanted to layer it to add more detail, but we wanted to save some texture memory and reuse that same texture. So what I'll do here is, let's actually zoom in a little bit closer. I'm going to create my UVW transform texture, and then I'm also going to go to the operators and let's choose an Octane mix texture. And let's scooch over here just a little bit. So I'm going to select the UVW transform texture and middle mouse button drag this float image texture or bump texture into input texture. So you can see it's coming in through there. And then I'm going to go down here in the UVW transform texture and click on the checker box next to UV transform. And let's just use scale. And I'll set this to 0.5, 0.5. So we're not going to see any difference quite yet. Let's take a look at our surface here so we can see what's going on. So there's our surface. So what we need to do is we need to plug the UVW texture transform into a mix node so that we can mix together our original image with its original transform and the output of the UVW transform texture, which is being scaled down by half. So I'll take my mix texture and let's middle mouse button drag the float image texture into texture 1 and then the UVW transform texture into texture 2. So these are now going into the mix node. And let's put the output of this into the bump. So you can see we just got much more detail in our bump here. And if I go into that scale transform, let's say I put this to say 0.1 by 0.1, you can see we have a much smaller texture. If I take my mix texture here and move the input to one side, there's our original texture at the original scale. Here's our scaled down version, and now the two are blended together to make a lot more detail. And the nice thing about the mix node is, let's say I wanted that fine detail to be a bit more subtle. I can bring the mix node up to like that level, and then we have kind of two levels of detail on the surface. And it looks kind of cool. So that is the UVW texture. Extremely useful and a great way to save on texture memory when you're adding detail to your surfaces.